Hello viewers and learners of the Postgraduate Diploma in Environmental and Occupational Health and the Master of Arts in Environmental and Occupational Health. Welcome to this session. Today we will talk on the course MEV 004, that is Environmental Toxicology. And the topic for this session is water pollution and the waterborne pathogens and the pollutants, mainly the biological contaminants. Now let us start with a case study. The Mississippi River Basin. This contains almost 2/3 of the continental land area of the United States. And here we find that there are several of the industries, there are the factories, there are also farms which drain their substances into this Mississippi River Basin. And this is supposed to be one of the world's highly productive agricultural region. Now, from this water, of course, it is carried on. There are a lot of pollutants in the water, and then there are also certain pollutants. Now, all this is carried to the Mississippi River and its tributaries. Finally, all these sediments and the pollutants, they end up in the Gulf of Mexico. And here, the Gulf of Mexico is one of the source for the fish and the shellfish in that region, especially for the US. Now, each spring and summer, a lot of nitrates and the phosphates, these are actually getting into this Gulf of Mexico. That is from these rivers, then it is entering this Gulf. And then we find that there is a boom of the phytoplanktons, the algal bloom, and it leads to eutrophication. And finally, there are a lot of the organisms which are the decaying organisms, and then the microorganisms act on these algal blooms and the substances, and the oxygen in this Gulf of Mexico waters is basically reduced. So this low dissolved oxygen, this can be as low as 2 parts per million, 2 ppm, or even less than that. And that is why this region is also referred to as the dead zone. So here in this picture, which you can see the Gulf of Mexico where this is placed and the dead zone. So why do we refer to this as the dead zone? And that is because right. So this is referred to as the dead zone. And why do we refer to this as the dead zone? Because there is actually no animal or marine life in this region. So there are 400 or so dead zones in the entire world, and one of them is this case study which I took up. And here again, when the water, that is after the storm or the rainwater, when this gets into the river, again the oxygen levels could be compensated. It could get better. So in 2003, in 2015, so many of these studies have been done. So this session, we are discussing about the contaminants. In specifically, we are going to discuss about the biological contaminants that enter the rivers and the river systems, and the toxic effects that they can have on the human systems. So the first question that comes to our mind, are we managing our water resources properly? So our planet is unique. Now, if you see from the darkness of space in the galaxy, this appears as a blue sphere, okay, as a blue sapphire or a jewel, and this sparkles. And all this is only because of liquid water that is present. But still, this is a precious water resource, and that is the reason there is life on this planet, on this earth. But still, it is being poorly managed. Basically because of irresponsible behavior by us, by the human beings, and that we are not understanding the value of this precious resource. We are polluting it, and we are also wasting this water resource. Therefore, access to fresh water resource, this is a global health concern, and the World Health Organization, they have estimated that almost more than 6.5 lakh people die from infectious diseases, that is mainly the waterborne infectious diseases. So this is really a very high number. Now, the availability of the water resources. Here again, the WHO, they estimate that 57% of the water resources in the homes of the people, they are coming from the piped resources, or they get the piped water in their homes. the rest of the people in the world, they have to find the water resource, and they also have to travel to far away and distant places in order to collect the same. So this is very particular in the case of Asia, India, Africa, Somalia, where there is a drought, where there is a lot of problems for the getting the water resources. So people have to travel miles and miles in order to just for their safe drinking water supplies. But again, are these safe drinking water supplies clean of the infectious diseases? That is one question that comes to our mind. So access to water is therefore a national, global security issue, because water and the rivers, they don't have any boundary. Okay, they do not say that this state is mine and this country is mine. They just flow from one region to the other. So therefore, there are rising tensions within the states and also between the states, because the states and the countries and also the districts, they are all bounded by certain boundaries. But the water resources are shared by the states. So the water flows into two districts, into two states, into two countries, and therefore there are these global problems which are there, and tensions due to the water conflicts are there globally. Now there is excessive withdrawal of the water for the various usages, basically for the human consumption. So what does this result in? We find that there are falling water tables, there are shrinking lakes, there are the dwindling river flows, and also there are disappearing wetlands. So these wetlands are really rich in the biodiversity. They provide us so much. But again, these are also disappearing, all because of excessive withdrawal of the water for various reasons. It could be in the bottling segment, it could be for the agricultural reasons, for other applications in the factories, and so on. Again, excessive freshwater withdrawal, that will also result in water pollution, in degraded water quality. So the water quality can become degraded to a very great extent. Then there is reduced fish population. So in a certain region, in certain lakes, you find that there is a ethnic population of the fishes. There could be a very distinct population of the fishes which are not found in any other place. So that is endemic to that region. Now, suppose these water resources are decreasing, then again, when the water quality is degraded, there can be a decline in these endemic fish population. Also the aquatic populations of, it could be even the plant population. Then there is extinction of the aquatic species that occurs at the next level. Then finally, you can have a degraded aquatic ecosystem services. So these were some of the factors and some of the effects, that the impacts that we see when there is excessive withdrawal of the fresh water in certain regions. Now let us come on to rivers and pollution. So we all know what are rivers, we all know the definition of pollution, and with growing urbanization and industrialization, we see that all the rivers in any country, they are becoming polluted with several contaminants. These could be with the chemicals, with the waste, with the domestical contaminants, with fertilizers, with pesticides, and all this is providing a challenge in order to provide the clean and safe drinking water to all the citizens. Especially we are talking about India. So most of the rivers and streams in India, they are turning into sewers. Sewage, excreta, and all this have increased the pollution level, and the coliform level, that is the E. coli, Escherichia coli levels, this also have increased terribly. And then we find that there are pathogenic microorganisms which are basically making the river water unfit for their consumption. So rivers and pollution. So we find that including the pollution of the rivers which comes from the various sources, this again can be a place, a host for the biological contaminants which can cause several infectious diseases. Now talking about water pollution, so the sources of the water and the usage of the water. So we use the water for various purposes, and the source can come from the rivers, from the groundwater, from the lakes, and so on. Then the pollution aspects, it could be the point sources and the non-point sources. Point sources can include the exact factory point or the exact agricultural point from where it comes. Non-point can be that it is just draining from one source from a nearby or from a far off distant place. Contamination could be, there could be organic solvents, there could be inorganic substances, there could be textile dyes, then again there could be heavy metals, there could be biomedical waste, there could be the biological contaminants. So all these can be liberated in the river water, causing high levels of pollution. Now there is a shocking fact that the groundwater in 12 of the Indian states, this is polluted with the radioactive substance, that is uranium. Nearly 29%, that is 3 in 10 wells that is tested in Punjab, is contaminated with uranium, which is a radioactive substance. So you can see the consequence what radioactivity can have on a human body. And uranium in Punjab's groundwater is 17.7 times more than the safe limit or the permissible levels that is prescribed by the World Health Organization. So in some places it even exceeded the concentration of 532 ppb, that is exceeding the concentration which is prescribed by the World Health Organization and various other Bureau of the Indian Standards with regard to the water quality. So radioactivity, radioactive substance that can have several degrading consequences on the human health. That could be on the nervous system, that could have paralytic attacks, that could result in microcephaly of the head and so on. So several people have paralysis and even teratogenic effects. The newly born children can have problems with in relation to their cerebral and the cognitive development. So that is what a radioactive substance can have on the human body. Now coming on to the river Ganga. So this is also one of the most polluted rivers in our country. The river Ganga, or the Ganges that we call, this is a very sacred river and we use it for all our spiritual purposes and also all the rituals. Here again we find that this is a badly managed river and we find idols of the, after the puja, we find the idols of the god and the goddesses that are floating. We find the flowers, we find certain other ashes, and also this is also being used for the last rites of the people. So we find even certain dead corpses which are floating in this river. So this is a poorly managed river, and think of this river and this tributaries when the water is taken for the consumption purposes. So river Ganga, this is a concoction of waste, as I can put it in simple terms, where we find untreated waste, we find human and animal remains, we find sewage, we find the chemical waste and the wastewater and also the garbage. And all this is due to the irresponsible behavior by individuals, by us, by the discharge of untreated sewage, effluents into the rivers by the municipalities, and industrial discharge and also improper waste disposal. So all this can result in the river being polluted with several toxic pollutants. Now you may be thinking that has the Indian government come up with certain initiatives? Yes, the Indian government has launched several programs and policies which are aimed at reducing and conserving and rejuvenating our rivers across the country. Now let us see what are they. So we find the Namami Gange and the National Mission for the Clean Ganges, the National River Conservation Plan, the National Mission for the Clean Chambal, National Mission for the Clean Narmada, and also National River Linking Projects. So the Indian government is coming up from time to time with certain projects, with certain innovative ideas, and also we have even come up with the Swachhata initiatives where for almost 10 to 15 days in all organizations, people are coming up with awareness activities and in the form of environmental awareness, that may be with the cleaning up the campuses and keeping up the sanitation and hygiene into a place, then coming up with competitions like the painting competitions or the Nukkad Natak, all this for the benefit of the children or the employee and staff of any organization. So why are we doing all this? Just for a consciousness, for a conscious behavior and the role that every individual can play in protecting the natural resources, in protecting our nature's own gifts, which are precious gifts without which our health and we cannot survive. 81 Indian rivers and their tributaries. These are toxic and they have high concentration of one or more of the heavy metals. We find that the heavy metals that were detected beyond the safe limits, they include arsenic, chromium, cadmium, mercury, copper, lead, iron and nickel. This was a report that was jointly prepared by the Central Water Commission and by the Center for Science and Environment in the year 2024. Then we also find that the mercury levels in the samples that were collected at Palla in Delhi for the river Yamuna, for the water quality monitoring and surveillance for the river Yamuna, that was 9 times higher than this Bureau of Indian Standards, and that limits, the permissible limits are only 1 microgram per liter. So we can find from all this that how contaminated our rivers are and how polluted even the tributaries and the major rivers are with these heavy metals and contaminants. So heavy metals also, when they are biomagnified, they can also have irreversible effects on the human body. And let us see what are the effects. So we find ecosystem effects, then we find the livestock and the human health which are affected, we find the marine life which is affected. All are negatively impacted. So all these heavy metals, this is not doing any good to the planet. Then in the human systems themselves, we find that people are affected with reproductive failure, with sterility, with immune system suppression, with acute poisoning from chemicals from the industries, infections and life-threatening infectious diseases. So that is why now we find that the organisms are getting multiple drug resistant. So several drugs that are being given for the treatment, even there, they are getting resistant to these drugs. So there are these infections are the life-threatening infections. Now, my dear students, that you have understood about water pollution with the help of a case study and what the effects that they can have, the impacts that they can have on short-term and long-term basis, and what is water pollution and how the rivers are being managed, badly managed in India and also in other countries. Let us now go on to the waterborne pathogens. Waterborne pathogens, this can include the bacteria, the viruses, they can also include the parasites, and they are transmitted via contaminated water and contaminated food. And that can cause the disease such as cholera, typhoid fever, dysentery, hepatitis A, and girth of many other of the gastrointestinal diseases. So these are caused by the waterborne pathogenic infectious pathogens. Now, how are these pathogens transmitted? So you may be thinking that, that I am drinking clean water every day and still I succumbed to typhoid fever. So this occurs while using infected water for the cooking purposes, for the drinking purposes, for the washing the clothes, and improper water treatment mechanism. So we need to see that the point from where we collect our water source, the water is clean of infectious diseases, and then we treat our water. Filtration is very important. Boiling the water for a long time, that is also very important. That can also remove many of the infectious diseases. Again, consuming the food from the open roadside places, that can also give you a wealth of diseases. So we should avoid, and we should normally go for the places where the food is covered and closed and that is safe for human consumption. Majority of the waterborne diseases, we find that they affect the elderly and also the young children or those who are immunity compromised, who are immune compromised, and maybe due to poor hygiene, weak immunity, and most of these diseases are life-threatening because many of them don't understand that a bacterial infection, this multiplies in hours. So the infection goes up, it speeds up very fast. So, and they divide by binary fission. So 2 becoming 4, 4 becoming 8, 8 becoming 16, 16 becoming 32, and so on. So within 20 minutes, within half an hour, a bacteria is able to reproduce and build up its number in the body. Then toxins start accumulating in the body. After that, you find that the effects. So the symptoms can be from a few hours, from a few days, and sometimes even a month. That is why these bacterial infections, they can be life-threatening diseases. Now, how many people are affected globally by these waterborne infectious pathogenic diseases? About more than 800 million people, they lack basic drinking water service. 159 million, they are dependent on the surface water. And this is a statistics that is given by the World Health Organization. Now, at least 2 billion people, they utilize drinking water that is even contaminated with feces. So this is a very sorry state of affairs and very sad to note. And these water sources, they can transmit the waterborne diseases which have been linked to about more than 500 million diarrheal deaths, that is annually, every year. So that is why watery dysentery, diarrhea and the cholera, these are among the worst, and they impact several million people around the world. And that is also linked to the socio-economic status and the inequity among the countries, among the developed countries and among the lesser developed and the developing countries. This is also a standard in the water quality terms. So that was globally. How many people are affected in India? So in India also the numbers are quite shocking. About 1 in 4 individuals globally, they lack access to safe drinking water, and this was put forth by the UNICEF and the WHO. The health expenditure due to water pollution in India, this is 3% of the nation's GDP. That is approximately $6 to $8 billion annually. This statistics comes from the World Bank report. And around 40 million people in India, they suffer from the waterborne diseases annually. So isn't this a sad state of affairs in our country? So we need to be responsible. We need to filter and manage our water resources responsibly. Along the river banks, the sediments, the soil, the groundwater quality, all this has to be in check, because there are millions of people who are consuming this water, and if this is going to be contaminated with these infectious pathogens, then life can be a disaster. Now this chart, this figure in this on your screen, this shows certain bacterial diseases. Among them, some are airborne bacterial diseases and some are the waterborne bacterial diseases. So anthrax, tuberculosis, whooping cough, diphtheria, pneumonia, these are all by air, that is contact with the airborne particles, and these bacterial diseases are transmitted through air from one person to another, through the cough or through the saliva or the droplet infection from a person. Cholera, typhoid, then we find the diarrheal diseases, all this, they can be contracted through the water. Then we find tetanus, which is coming through the skin base. When your skin is open, when you have a wound or an infection, then we find that tetany bacteria can then affect a person. So these are some important bacterial diseases that affect the human being. Now let us talk about the bacterial waterborne pathogens and the diseases. The first is Vibrio cholerae. This causes cholera and that leads to severe diarrhea and the dehydration. We will also discuss a little more in detail about these bacteria. Salmonella typhi, that causes the typhoid fever and it is characterized by high fever, weakness and the stomach pain. Shigella causes the shigellosis and the dysentery, and it results in severe diarrhea containing blood and also mucus. Now coming on to specifically cholera. So this is caused by Vibrio cholerae, which is a gram-negative bacteria, by the consumption of contaminated food and drinking water. The symptoms could be watery diarrhea, vomiting, fever, abdominal cramp, and it possesses a mortality rate which is alarmingly high, really very high. People with a suppressed immunity, who are malnourished, who are infected with the human immunodeficiency virus or HIV, are at a heightened risk if they are infected with this bacteria. Now here again, the patients can have a lethargy, they can have sunken eyes, they can have a dry mouth, wrinkled hands, they have a small breathing effect due to acidosis, blood pressure drop, there could be a rapid peripheral pulse, and so many other of the effects. Now there is an antibiotic resistance that is shown by the bacteria to tetracycline, to trimethoprim, to the sulfamethoxazole, to erythromycin, and therefore new generation antimicrobials. This has been seen in the laboratory, and in vitro studies they find that these antimicrobials are much effective in treating the cholera. So this is therefore a global health threat to several people, and it is an indicator of inequity and lack of social development. Annually, there are 4 million cases and several deaths to cholera. 12 hours and 5 days are the symptoms for the cholera to be shown, and again it is preventable by assuring the clean water, sanitation facilities, good hygiene practices, and also community practice where the community workers can bring about awareness programs, and also vaccination is important. Typhoid is again caused by Salmonella typhi by the gram-negative non-spore forming rods, and here also it is contaminated water which transmit it, and the incubation time for this bacteria is 12 to 36 hours in the human body. Here again there are prolonged episodes of fever, of diarrhea, gastrointestinal upset, and prompt attention, and the antimicrobials are required in order to stop this disease. Viral waterborne pathogens are there like the hepatitis A, where the liver infection is spread through the contaminated food and water, and jaundice can come. Then norovirus through contaminated water, and also polio virus, which leads to the nerve damage and the paralysis. Then there are endotoxins and the enterotoxins, which are given out by certain microbials. So these are nothing but poisonous substances that can be inside a bacterial cell, specifically the endotoxin, and they are released when the disintegration of this cell occurs. They are lipopolysaccharides, and they are present in the outermost layer of the gram-negative bacteria. E. coli, Salmonella, Shigella, Pseudomonas, then the Haemophilus influenza, Neisseria, then the pertussis bacteria, Bordetella pertussis, and the Vibrio cholerae. These are the endotoxin producers. Then we find the enterotoxins. This is a protein, and it is an exotoxin released by microbes, and this normally targets the gastrointestinal system, mainly the intestine. They are proteins, and they also act as enzymes. They can increase the permeability by the chloride ions in the cells of the intestinal mucosa. That is why people will complain of intestinal cramps and loss of the appetite, not able to eat properly, and so on. E. coli and Staphylococcus aureus, which are pus-forming bacteria, the Staphylococcus group of bacteria. They are the two bacterial species which can generate such conditions by the enterotoxins. So therefore, toxins are also poisonous substances that are liberated by the bacteria, and they can have certain harmful effects. The last is the parasitic waterborne pathogens and diseases. So here in this figure, you can find that of the Giardia lamblia, which causes giardiasis, leading to diarrhea, bloating, and cramps. So this is a very normal seasonal amoebiasis which everyone suffers from. We find the cryptosporidiosis, the amoebiasis, and the schistosomiasis. All this contains the parasites, and when you come in contact with the water which has these parasites or their spores, then we can be affected by these diseases. So how can we prevent these waterborne pathogens? Accessing safe drinking water, improving the sanitation facilities and hygiene, and water treatment and the filtration. We can also protect the sources from the contamination. That is important. That is the ground rule. The vaccination, we can get vaccination against certain diseases such as hepatitis A and typhoid, and that can also help us to a great extent. Finally, the river rejuvenation program, because we started with the rivers. So the aim is basically to restore the rivers to their original conditions by pollution abatement. We reduce the untreated sewage and industrial waste that could be entering the river by afforestation, by planting trees along the river banks, and so that we can improve the soil fertility, prevent soil erosion, groundwater recharge, ecological restoration by restoring the biodiversity, and also public awareness is important, a livelihood important, the livelihood opportunities where you can create livelihood opportunities, and ecotourism for the sustainable river-based solutions. So that will go in a long term for protecting the rivers, the water pollution, and all the river and the tributaries in our country. So my dear learners, today we discussed about the water pollution, in specifically the biological contaminants, certain biological contaminants like the bacteria, the viruses, and the parasites which can cause pollution, all because of badly managed river systems, and we are the culprits who are contributing to this. Finally, we also talked about the river regeneration programs and what we as an individual can do in preventing this pollution. Thank you for your patient listening.